When Secretary Noem claimed habeas corpus gives the president power to remove people and suspend their rights, she revealed a constitutional ignorance so stunning it left senators speechless. What Senator Hassan exposed wasn't just a slip-up, it was proof that someone tasked with protecting American freedoms doesn't understand the most basic right separating us from police states.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Madam Secretary. Secretary Noem, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff recently said that the Trump administration is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus. Last week you were asked about this, and I want to clarify your position because it's obviously really important to get this right. So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas
right
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the live free or die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though, that this president...
It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress. So I have been asking executive branch nominees a simple question over the past few months. If the president orders them to break the law, I've been asking, will you follow the law or follow the order? I want to ask you a more specific question here. If the president tries to suspend habeas corpus and a federal court reverses the president's order, will you comply with the court order and uphold habeas corpus, or will you follow the president's directive?
We are following all federal court orders and are complying with that, as is the president, and every decision that I make as well.
That is obviously not true for anybody who reads the news. There are federal court orders right now, including returning somebody who was deported mistakenly. But to be clear, this is about a fundamental legal right that ensures that we live in a free society instead of a police state that would have a sham legal system like Russia or North Korea. So I'm glad that you have now committed to following court orders. I'm glad you believe in the basic freedom for Americans if ordered to do so by a court. And again, I want just to make clear that it is critically important that even if the president tries to suspend the right of people to know why they've been detained or imprisoned, if a federal court reverses that order, that you will follow that order. And I hope all members of the administration will, because it's obviously critical that some of the people, for instance, who've been deported by mistake, who didn't get due process, be returned in compliance with court orders. So now, let's move on to another issue. International criminal organizations target Americans with sophisticated cyber crime, including elaborate scams that robbed Americans of billions of dollars, with seniors in the United States losing $5 billion to scammers in 2024 alone. As artificial intelligence improves, so does the ability of criminals to deceive and defraud Americans. With this new technology, criminals can impersonate loved ones, develop advanced malware, or make more convincing phishing messages. How is DHS working to identify trends in illegal activity and ensure that new AI systems have safeguards in place to prevent their use in criminal activity?
Yes, we are working extensively through CISA, but in all of our agencies to make sure that we're going after these criminal, nefarious actors. I would say partnering with private industry is critically important so that we have the insight that we need to really understand the tactics that they use and the advancements in software. The AI ability that they have to adjust and to supersede some of our systems is incredible. And so investing in those systems is important, but also having the knowledge and bringing everybody to the table and breaking down the silos between our agencies and our intelligence agencies is important, so we all have the information that we need to get.
Well, and that gets me to one final point and question here, because Senator Peters began to ask about it. There's been recent reporting that indicates that the Chinese government installed remote access to Chinese-made power inverters in the U.S., raising concerns that the Chinese government could try to disable parts of our power grid. And you made a comment following up on Senator Peters' question about the importance of not only working with private industry on this issue, as you would also want to work on AI, but also on working with state and local governments on cybersecurity. And can you just talk to me a little bit about how DHS is partnering with state and local governments right now on cyber?
Well, that's one of the core critical missions of CISA, is to help those state and local governments harden their systems. We're extremely vulnerable by our weakest link. And so when you have a small state that doesn't have the resources it needs to invest in these security operations, then they're vulnerable to attacks and hacking attempts, and they can access our systems. If they have a contract or a system that interfaces with the federal system, it makes us vulnerable as well. So we are responsible for 10 of the 16 critical infrastructures under the Department of Homeland Security, and making sure that China can't come in and shut down our electrical grid, our water systems, things that people rely on every day for their day-to-day lives is very important. So that's why we need these kind of partnerships, is to make sure that we're secure all the way down to our smallest actor that participates.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate working more with you on that. Thank you.
What Senator Hassan exposed in that hearing wasn't just ignorance. It was a preview of how constitutional protections crumble when the people sworn to defend them don't understand what they're protecting. Secretary Noem's definition of habeas corpus as presidential power to remove people and suspend their rights represents exactly the opposite of what this foundational freedom actually means. Habeas corpus, literally, you shall have the body, requires government to justify detention publicly. It's the barrier between lawful arrest and arbitrary imprisonment. Without it, authorities can disappear people indefinitely, without explanation or trial. This isn't abstract legal theory. It's the difference between living in America and living under authoritarianism. Noem's confusion reveals something deeper than academic error. As Homeland Security Secretary, she oversees detention facilities, deportation operations, and emergency powers. If she believes habeas corpus grants detention authority rather than restricts it, how does that shape her department's approach to civil liberties during crises? Hassan's follow-up question cut to the institutional heart. What happens when courts rule against presidential suspension attempts? Noem's evasive response about following federal court orders while simultaneously defending presidential suspension authority shows the dangerous ambiguity that enables constitutional violation. The historical context Hassan provided matters crucially. Even Lincoln, during Civil War, sought congressional approval for habeas corpus suspension. The idea that modern presidents can unilaterally suspend this protection without legislative backing represents a fundamental misunderstanding of separation of powers. This exchange illuminates a broader pattern where officials claim constitutional authority while misunderstanding constitutional constraints. When Hassan referenced current court orders being ignored regarding mistaken deportations, she wasn't making theoretical points. She was documenting real-world consequences of this constitutional confusion. The practical implications extend beyond detention policy. If senior officials don't grasp basic civil liberties concepts, how do they train subordinates? How do they write policies? How do they respond during emergencies when constitutional protections matter most? Hassan's questioning technique deserves analysis too. She didn't lecture about constitutional law. She made Noem define the concept, then corrected the fundamental error publicly. This forces accountability in real time and creates a record that can't be walked back later. The broader lesson here isn't about individual competence, but institutional integrity. When people responsible for protecting constitutional rights don't understand those rights, the system becomes vulnerable to exactly the kind of authoritarian drift that habeas corpus was designed to prevent. This wasn't just a confirmation hearing moment, it was a stress test of how well our institutions can function when leadership lacks foundational knowledge about the principles they're supposed to uphold. The timing of this exchange matters enormously. We're living through an era where democratic norms face unprecedented pressure, where emergency powers expand rapidly, and where public trust in institutions hangs by increasingly thin threads. In this context, having a Homeland Security Secretary who fundamentally misunderstands the most basic protection against government overreach isn't just concerning, it's potentially catastrophic. Consider the downstream effects when this misunderstanding filters through the massive DHS bureaucracy. Field agents, detention officers, and policy analysts look to leadership for guidance on constitutional boundaries. If that guidance comes from someone who believes habeas corpus grants rather than limits government power, the result is predictable: policies that push beyond legal limits, training that misrepresents civil rights, and a culture that sees constitutional protections as obstacles rather than foundations. Hassan's persistence in getting Noem to commit to following court orders wasn't procedural theater. It was an attempt to establish on-the-record constraints that could be referenced later when constitutional conflicts inevitably arise. This creates a paper trail of accountability that becomes crucial during judicial review of controversial policies.